Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm going to be doing my 14.19 support tier list. So if you have content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. A couple of things have shifted around in the support role. It's probably the role which has been impacted the least by the changes going into 14.19, with all the items obviously being nerfed to a certain extent. Some support items did obviously get hit a bit harder than others. In fact, Trailblazer got a bit slightly better, which really helps a lot of these supports which haven't quite moved over to it yet, but should probably be leaning more towards those directions. So let's go for the tier list. We're going with the D tier. It's going to consist of relatively similar champions to the previous patch. We have the likes of Ashe and MF, who have been underperforming the support role for a while. MF more than Ashe. Ashe still has a level of viability, but she's still pretty bad and tends to be a bit more elite skewed when played in the support role, very much relying on her early game dominance to like create leads and then utilizing that advantage later on. Veigar is a pretty gimmicky pick. He's obviously benefiting from the changes in both the bot lane and the mid lane. Just isn't really that successful as a support. Obviously you're playing primarily around your cage as for value here, and oftentimes alongside like a Ziggs duo, so you can get the W into cage combo, but it's not something I'd really play off of, unless you're kind of just primarily picking it around that. Malphite also does underperform as a support, obviously once again playing around his Q harass into his ult combos. Yuumi drops down a tier. She is in fact really underperforming quite heavily with the nerfs towards Imperial Mandate this patch. This was one of her best items. That got quite aggressively hit. Movement speed got taken off of it, which was something which gave obviously her ADC a bit more power, plus some of the other items she utilizes just went down a bit, and yeah, she drops down towards the D tier at the moment. I'm not a huge fan of the state Yuumi is in. I think the rework she received, where they kind of tailored her primarily for on-hit and crit marksman, was really bad. I think that really reduced her level of maybe not controlling the game, but it basically meant if your ADC underperforms, you aren't really a champion in the game either. Obviously, the previous iteration of Yuumi, she could quite comfortably sit on bruisers and AP champions and be quite successful on them, oftentimes being able to still be a valuable champion to a draft, even when your ADC is either being targeted or being or just not really performing within the game. Yeah, current iteration of Yuumi does really struggle at the moment, something I just wouldn't really even recommend picking up. She is intentionally kept underpowered because of how frustrating she can be when too strong within the meta. C tier is going to consist of Ziggs. I'm surprised honestly that Ziggs support even has this level of a player base. It's actually pretty, it's not unpopular to the point where it's like there are multiple champions on this tier list which are less popular than Ziggs support, which is crazy to me because Ziggs just doesn't have great supportive traits. He is very much all about his damage, siege potential. W obviously can be valuable, but it's mainly just around his harass, kind of akin to something like a Xerath. But even Xerath obviously has his E, which is a strong hard CC ability. Ziggs has to play around his W and his E slow as like his soft crowd control in a way. Pantheon, I'm not a huge fan of Pantheon at the moment. This champion's definitely been struggling with the item changes. That combined with the fact he was already a bit underpowered going into this split. He's getting buffed in 14.20, which should help him, and I imagine it might push him back up to the B tier, but for the moment he's going to be within my C tier. Maokai has just been indirectly hit because of his jungle power, and it's really hurt him in support. I honestly think they should have just taken away some of the jungle damage he does, so as not to kill his other roles. I think Maokai should be a champion which can function both top and support. And honestly, the route we went with jungle felt a bit forced when it was, I believe it was his third role down. It was like support quite comfortably as his most played role, and then top lane, then jungle. Obviously, they tried to really aggressively push him towards being a jungle. It ended up being primarily just a competitive champion, not really seeing that much in solo queue, but he's now paying for the sins of that. He drops down to the C tier in the support role. Trailblazer being buffed this patch does help him. It's definitely something you can look at, and it will definitely give him a bit of a boost up, but the champion is underpowered at the moment. Blitzcrank. So Blitzcrank might be a champion you're surprised to see this low, but Blitzcrank has been on a downwards trajectory for a while. He got nerfed more than I think he should have done, like back along, where he took a lot of durability out of him and then nerfed some of his abilities slightly, and overall it's just put him in a worse spot. Like, there are champions which provide a bit more than Blitzcrank at the moment. Obviously, his hook is perceived as one of the strongest and most powerful abilities, especially in mid and low elo. That's why he supports such a high ban rate, and similar to Morgana in a way, where Morgana Q is often the reason why she supports such a high ban rate. But this champion definitely not performing that well at the moment. Sits within my C tier. There are better picks which you can find more consistency on, and oftentimes will win you more games. Renata and Amumu wrap up the C tier. In Amumu's case, he got hotfix nerfed in 14.19b. Lost a bit of power on his E, lost a bit of power on his W, and that drops him down from the B tier to the C tier. Already the itemization down here just wasn't too good for him. He really misses the likes of Radiant Virtue and Even Shard, which really enabled him to be a strong support option. In Renata's case, she's been underpowered in solo queue for a while. She's still pretty strong and competitive and does have a pretty high skill ceiling, especially when paired with like certain things, whether that's like the Callista, which is doing a bit better this patch. So if you have someone who's a Callista duo, you can definitely still find success in that kind of a pairing, but that does tend to be pretty elite skewed, so not something I'd really recommend unless you're very comfortable on it. Teemo leads us off in the B tier. This champion is unironically a decent support. Like, whereas I know people really hate on Teemo as a support option because it's very gimmicky in the way it functions. You're obviously playing quite heavily around your Q, but there's a lot of value to this champion. The shrooms are very powerful zoning tools. He has a lot of control, lots of scaling. His Q, of course, is a really valuable tool. He's pretty mobile with his W. There's just a lot of power to this pick, which I think people kind of sleep on in the support role, even though oftentimes when you see a Teemo support, you think, this guy is just going to troll me, which is unfortunate for the position for the champion to be in, but he's still solid. He's a good B tier pick. Karma. I don't like Karma that much. I've been pretty vocal about this for a while. I think this champion is very much reliant on having a dominant laning phase, and if you don't get that or things go wrong, this champion does not have a great fallback pattern. They've buffed it in the E-shielding and making that a bit better scaling-wise, but overall, the champion really does struggle later on into the game if she is not able to find those early game advantages. It does look like Malignance is her first best item again. Imperial Mandate got hit a bit heavier than some of the other options, so that is definitely the way you want to look to go back towards. But overall, I'm not a huge fan of this champion. If you're comfortable getting those advantages and then converting that into shield value later on through having stronger items, then that is definitely something you can look at and you could find success on this pick, but not something I'd really recommend, especially if you're like starting out or you're just looking for something to kind of get you into the higher ranks in the support role. Alistar. Alistar's a unique champion. His strength as a pick really quite heavily scales with the value you get on the champion. Like, not so much his numbers, but the combos and the angles you can find. Not so much like, I mean, Rel to a similar extent, but Rel does quite value her numbers, her movement speed, stuff like that can all be quite valuable on her. Alistar, if you can land a good WQ onto like multiple targets, then that is most of the value this champion needs. Obviously, more of his power is tied into his ultimate, making sure you're popping that at the correct time to reduce as much damage as possible, or whether that's like you're caught out on flank, stuff like that. There's lots of value cases for it. But overall, yeah, Alistar pretty much scales with the amount of like value you can have within the draft, less so with just the power of the champion. But the items at the moment for him aren't the greatest. They're fine. Like, you can still opt into things like Trailblazer and Zeke. So if these items are pretty nice on him, but he's definitely been better in the past with the likes of obviously Even Shroud and Radiant Virtue, which once again kind of akin to Mumu. He really did rely on those items quite a bit. Nautilus has been on a downward trajectory, kind of akin to Blitzcrank for a while. No direct nerfs to Naut that I can remember, but Bloodsong should definitely be something people look at. Bloodsong is really heavily slept on this champion. I believe a lot of the tankier supports are actually kind of win rate deflated at the moment because of the amount of people who are opting into Celestial Dawn, I think that's what it's called, the support item which gives you the shield. It's fine in certain situations, but Slay and Bloodsong are both very viable and should definitely be things people look at more as like good options within the game. Nautilus probably rises up slightly when you're like picking the right things, building the right items, but he's not as strong as I believe a lot of people perceive him as being, even though he is considered like the go-to hook engaged champion out of the pool. Maybe Leona and Rel are slightly higher than him at the moment as like perception wise, but yeah, Nautilus is pretty close to them. What other champions have we got here? So we've got Pike, who has been underperforming this patch. The lethality items got a bit weaker, and he has definitely suffered from that. He had already been nerfed, I believe, in 14.17, so he drops towards the lower end of the B tier. Camille, still a fine support champion. Obviously, her player base has kind of shifted towards top, as she is a very strong top laner, especially in Elite at the moment. Support, she could just function here. Like, she's a good B tier pick in the middle. Yeah, that's what I'd really kind of put her as. Nico, more popular as a support at the moment than she is as a mid laner. She is obviously pretty valuable for her W, which can be like really powerful ability if you know how to utilize it correctly. Her E is a very strong snare. Her Q gives her a lot of harass early on into the game, and her ult is a very powerful teamfight tool. If you fall behind, you can feel quite bad within the game though, as she's not the most durable champion, and if you're behind trying to get these ult angles, and even if you get these ult angles, might not secure you the win as comfortably as if you were ahead of the curve. Heimerdinger has definitely fallen down in popularity in the support role. He's finding a bit more popularity in both mid and top at the moment. Obviously his reliance on like shoving waves and playing as like this early game kind of like domination into like control champion, I guess you'd describe him as, is not as strong as it used to be, because obviously they nerfed his turrets quite aggressively early on into the game and pushed him more towards level scaling, so he's not as strong in that regard, but he's still a fine support pick. You can definitely find potential in this champion, especially with like combos and like yeah, there's unique combos and unique aspects to this champion, which once you've played a lot of this pick, you can definitely wrap your head around, and he can definitely rise up. Like, I think there's definitely potential for Heimerdinger. He's just not as strong as I would recommend some of the A and the S tier picks are at the moment. Rakan has been on a downward spiral as well for a bit. He was really strong for, I believe, most of last split, and the season before he was considered like a top 2, top 3 support for a long time, kind of alongside the likes of Janna. But he's yeah, his strength has really fallen down a bit throughout this season, and he now sits towards the middle of the B tier. The likes of Xayah being pretty weak have definitely hurt him as well. Obviously, that is one of his most common pairings. And yeah, overall, he's just not performing as well as he has done in the past. 3 other champions here. We have Fresh, who's fine. I would describe Fresh as a champion which is very, once again, pretty reliant on the skill of the player playing him. If you're good at Fresh, you'll find the angles, the lanterns, which you need to like secure wins. If you're not good at Fresh, there's not a huge amount of point playing this champion, as he is obviously pretty reliant on consistently landing hooks, utilizing the lantern effectively, making sure you are enabling your ADC to like feel the impact of having an ability as strong as that, whether that's allowing them to step forward, whether that's allowing like your front line to play on towers. There is lots of really valuable use cases of Lantern, which yeah, if kind of applied correctly, can make this champion a lot more valuable. His E is a strong ability. If you're weaving in your autos, you're making use of that flay, then yeah, that can be quite powerful. The R is underwhelming. I've said this before, but I think his R is probably the weakest part of his kit. And I mean, if Riot wanted to buff that, I think that is the way they should probably go. But overall, Fresh, yeah, once again, scales with the skill of the player. If you play this pick well, then he can definitely rise up throughout the tier list. Seraphine and Bard. Seraphine lost a lot of power with her W being nerfed in 14.17. I want to believe, I believe that was when they nerfed it. They took away some of the cooldown. I believe they nerfed the shielding power on that ability as well. Overall, yeah, this was a decent chunk of power lost. It is her primary supportive ability. Thus, she drops from like the S tier at the time to the B tier now. She did lose a bit this patch, so yeah, she jumps down a bit. Bard is close to the A tier. Both, well, actually all 3, Deadman's, Trailblazer, and Heart still look like really good items on him. And honestly, if you go these items, there's a high chance he does rise up throughout the tier list. People are still defaulting on Locket though. I imagine that will go down over time. Heart still looks to be considerably better as a first item, even though the sample sizes don't quite match up yet. It's pretty close. And then yeah, Trailblazer, really strong spot at the moment. Deadman's at a pretty good spot as well. Yeah, both these items can work really nicely on him. He really does value the movement speed. And Bard is a really solid B tier pick, definitely on the rise in his current state. Zoe and Silas, I'm actually going to put as like together, because these 2 champions kind of fit the same niche of, if you snowball and you get an advantage, these picks can just act as like mid laners. They will one-tap you in situations, whether that's with like a Storm Surge or a Ludens. These picks can feel really oppressive if ever ahead. If behind, they're just not as valuable as more traditional supportive options, so it comes down to comfort on these champions. They're not the kind of things I'd recommend you just pick up and just play as support picks, but if you're a mid laner to support, you play a lot of Sylas, you play a lot of Zoe, then yeah, these two picks can really function quite well here. Sylas is a bit more ult dependent, but Zoe can more generalistically be quite valuable. Soraka and Sona have been a bit on the downwards as well. I honestly am close to putting both these champions in the B tier. They've just not been, like, rather than having a gradual climb throughout the season, they've been having a gradual decline. Some of the other champions have just been rising up as more prominent and like consistent picks. Soraka was strong for a long time last season, and I believe so was Sona on like Old Moonstone, where it was slightly different to the iteration we currently have. But yeah, both these picks just not performing to the same level as they have been in the past. They're still fine, like they're good options, they're good enchanters. I would just recommend some of the other enchanters, which I have slightly higher up over them in their current states. Sona obviously has a pretty high win rate for the most part, but she's considerably less popular than Soraka. She's also quite heavily punishable early on into the game, especially if you're just not playing safe around like certain champions. You will find yourself chain inting in a lot of situations. Hui reaches the A tier. This has been gradually happening. I spoke about him last patch video where Hui got his WW buffed. They increased the amount of shield given to allies. Hui also massively benefited from this patch. He was one of the biggest winners. He's a great bot laner. He's a great mid laner, and he's a pretty decent support now. So Hui probably will get nerfed in 14.21. He's not being nerfed in 14.20, so do be aware of that. He is definitely someone you can put some time into and feel the reap the rewards over the next patch. Yeah, at the moment he jumps up to the A tier. Swain, I hate Swain support, but there's no doubt in saying that this champion is actually just an A tier support pick now. He was already slightly getting better towards the end of last split, but massively jumps up this split. The items didn't get nerfed as hard for him. Game time's slightly longer, there's less damage, and all these things just really help Swain. He's a really good mid laner, he's a really good bot laner, kind of akin to Hui, and he's a decent support now, so following similar trajectories, except for Hui is like 4 times more popular than Swain. Yeah, both these champions, same my A tier. Morgana, I also hate Morgana. I also think this champion is pretty... the kit functions awkwardly for a support. The W obviously can be a really lackluster ability. The R doesn't really match her kit that well. But yeah, the Q is a very powerful ability, especially if the setup. The E, if used correctly, can be really powerful, but then oftentimes it can be misperceived on how you want to utilize it, and that can oftentimes be punishing for like perception-wise. Overall, yeah, Morgana, actually an A tier pick at the moment, has gone up from the B tier. What else do we have? So we have Fiddlesticks, who stays with my A tier. He's a pretty gimmicky pick, but he's still a very valuable champion, both in jungle and the support role. Vel'Koz, I believe, has also risen up throughout my A tier. This champion, great artillery mage, has good base damage values, benefited from the mage items this patch. Some of them are being nerfed, and we will see some mages drop back down towards the B tier, but for the moment, he is a solid mid A tier pick. Zac and Galio sit next to each other as solid middle of the pack A tier tank options. Zac has great engage. Galio has great control, with the W being a very powerful ability and his damage and baseline stats being pretty nice at the moment. Galio also very good mid laner. Zac, great top laner, decent jungler. So there's a level of flexibility to these picks as well. Milio, Digger, but weaker this patch. He drops from S tier, I believe I had him as, to a mid A tier pick. He's still good with certain pairings, utilizing Echoes of Helia and Moonstone to be a very strong champion. Zilean sits middle of my A tier. He's fine. I think that's just what Zilean comes down to. If you want to pick him up, be my guest. This champion obviously has very powerful abilities within his kit. His Q has absurd base damage. His E has a very aggressive slow attached to it. His W being able to reset both these is also very powerful. His ult also very powerful tool. His passive very strong when utilized correctly. And all these, yeah, can attribute to the champion feeling quite oppressive and quite strong if played correctly. If you're consistently missing bombs and you're not utilizing the kit correctly, then he does lose a lot of value, and that can definitely be quite punishing. But he's a pretty good pick. He's a very middle, high-end A tier pick. Rel and Leona are my two engage options here. They are both still very solid picks, even though they did get nerfed in 14.18 over concerns of being dominant at Worlds. Leona has some of the most CC attached to her in the game. I guess you could argue Sejuani's pretty close, but Leona, obviously the Q, the E, the R, all very powerful CC abilities. Gives her a lot of value within the game, especially now that Merc Treads are just abhorrent boots to build. They're 1.3k gold for limited MR. You're mainly just building for the tenacity, which can feel quite bad in a lot of different games. In Rel's case, the E movement speed nerf was... It incentivizes her to go back to W maxing, which was kind of being moved off of. People were beginning to E max, but yeah, now W max once again looks to be standard. And yeah, she's still a very solid champion. Great engages, great team fight potential. Decent damage, honestly. She used to be with Rel used to be she didn't do any damage, but her damage is fine these days. A lot of obviously her E does percentage health damage. Her W and Q have decent baseline damages, and yeah, the main thing, the engage, the movement speed, also very valuable tools on her. So solid A tier pick. We've got 5 more champions here. Actually, I'll cover Lux first. So in Lux's case, she's had a great mage. I had her in the A tier before. I still have her in the A tier. If you're Snowball, then this champion can feel incredibly oppressive to play against. Kind of akin to Silas and Zoe, where she just plays like a mid laner at that point once you give her a lot of gold. And then the 4 other champions here, we have Shaco. We have, so we have Shaco, we have Shen, we have Tom, and we have LeBlanc. Actually, I've missed a champion here. I'm missing Braum. So Braum stays as a mid-A tier pick. He's great as a counter pick option. Don't blind him. He's great into like your Nautiluses, your Leonas, where you can really make a lot of value out of his E. Outside of that, if you play him into Chanters, he loses so much value and it will drop down the tier list quite aggressively. The 4 champions here, which I want to talk about, Shaco, Shen, Tom, and LeBlanc, could all be considered S tier picks. In Shaco's case, he has incredible control. His AP builds are thriving at the moment. Shen and Tom are massively benefiting from less damage in the game, utilizing Heartsteel, getting more procs of that. Just feels great for them, considering that item didn't get nerfed as anywhere near as hard as some of the other options. And LeBlanc has been progressively picked up as a support option more and more. This champion's been very good for a while, kind of going under the radar. I had her in the S tier for a bit. I've had her in an MV A tier for a bit. I believe she sits as like a high A tier option at the moment. With the Ludent Storm Surge nerfs next patch, I imagine she'll drop down to like a mid A, low A tier pick, but she's still very good in her current state. Definitely something you could put some time into. Then my S tier. So Lulu, Janna, and I'm missing one. Lulu, Janna, and Nami could be interchangeable with the 4 champions below them. In Lulu's case, she's obviously very synergistic with the likes of Cogmore, can function quite nicely with most of the on-hit champions at the moment, which does play to her strengths. She is very valuable with those kind of things, and on-hit champions obviously being quite strong at the moment does work for her. She did lose a bit of power with the items being slightly weaker though, so she is like a low S tier pick. Janna, for the first time, getting close to the A tier. She had been a pretty locked S tier pick for a while, but definitely lost a decent amount of power this patch with both Mandate, with Mandate being primarily weaker. That is the main thing here. Nami also lost a lot of power with Mandate being weaker. She drops from like a solid S tier pick to like a low S tier. Once again, could drop down to the A tier, but it has some really oppressive powerings which kind of hold her up at the moment. So definitely pick up the right things and you should find a decent amount of success. We have 6 champions left. So we have Brand, who is a huge winner this patch. He was dropping down in the previous season. Obviously, a lot of the nerfs towards jungle Brand had hurt him indirectly in the support role, even though he was already a good support, so it only dropped him down to the A tier. He's still a great carry potential here. But once again, more health in the game, longer extended team fights. Brand is thriving. He is once again an S tier pick. Next to him we have Zyra, who is also pretty similar, thriving off the having longer and more extended combat patterns where she can utilize her plants to effectively do more damage. Both these champions very solid S tier picks. And then we have Xerath and we have Tarek. In Tarek's case, he shot up once again. He was going to be nerfed in 14.20, but they took it away. I'm not surprised, honestly. This champion's very unpopular. He's very strong though. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Like, you're pairing with the likes of Nyla, and this champion is probably sat at like a 60% win rate with that kind of a pairing, which is insane to think about. But yeah, both these champions synergize really well with each other. In Zeref's case, he's been a great artillery mage for a long time. He's always been my recommended go-to. The ult changes they did to him back along, I mean, as I discuss every single patch video, yeah, really helped him, and it really secures him as a great support option. So Zeref, definitely something I'd recommend people look at if you are looking for something with great amounts of range and a level of carrier potential. So yeah, Zeref. And then my two S Plus champions, the same as the previous patch, we have Poppy and Senna, and once again it is broken. So yeah, both these champions are going to be in my S Plus tier. I have the image here. Poppy and Senna, both these champions, very good in their current state. Poppy is obviously being very aggressively nerfed in the next patch. They're taking down her E damage. I believe they are nerfing her passive quite aggressively as well, like very early on into the game. So she loses some, basically health, and she loses some of her damage, which, yeah, hurts support Poppy. I don't think it's dead by any means. I think it would drop down to either a low S or a high A tier pick. She's still performing very well at the moment. In Senna's case, she has a plethora of items available to her. Obviously, the most default ones are things like your cleavers, your echoes of Helia. She's really benefiting from Grasp being quite strong, with that being nerfed in 14.20. I recommend people move back over to the Summon Ares. So there are still strengths to her, and I believe she will maintain an S plus spot. So Senna is probably my pick of the patch, but there's a lot of really strong S plus S and even A options. So the B tier can be viable if you're very comfortable on them. But yeah, if you're looking for the kind of things I'd recommend that you want a bit of agency, then yeah, your Brands, your Zyras, your Seraphs, and even your Sennas to an extent can all be there. But Senna obviously plays more like an enchanter at the moment. If you want your enchanters, then yeah, Senna once again falls in that bracket. Nami, Janna, Lulu, all very solid options. And with Poppy, also still a very great pick at the moment. And those are my thoughts. So, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.